We come to the last contributor talk, and I'm very happy to have Meeks here, whose project he will present is, I think the digital humanities crowd agrees that it is a success disaster. Did you come up with that or somebody else? But it is actually a success disaster, right? So it's highly...
Catastrophic success.
Yeah, it is actually highly popular. And rightly so, I have to say. And we are very happy we have him. Digital Humanities 2012 doesn't have him. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming.
Is this what I'm using? Is this going to...
Yeah.
I guess that might visualize it differently. So my name is Elijah Meeks. I'm from Stanford University. I work in the library, where I'm the digital humanities specialist. Before I get started, I wanted to point out... There we go. Can't find the button. There's a bit.ly address here if you want. This is a Google slideshow, so you can just go to that. The slideshow's public, so you can jump ahead or focus on a slide if you want. So again, my name's Elijah Meeks. I'm at Stanford University. I work in the library in faculty services. I do faculty support for digital humanities projects, which means that I help integrate digital tools and objects and methods into traditional humanities research. It's kind of like what Mariah does, except my people don't have as much money. So one of the projects that we've been working on, that we worked on from July until May and was released in May, was ORBIS. It's a transportation network model of the Roman world. And today I'm going to talk about ORBIS a bit, and I'm going to talk about, there's a subtitle, because I'm going to focus on what ORBIS means to sort of looking at systems, specifically using this world systems theoretical framework, but looking at historical systems. So first off, ORBIS is a geospatial network model of the Roman world. It consists of around 700 sites and about 2,000 edges that connect these sites with parallel edges of different modes. So you have roads, you have upstream, downstream, and overseas connections. We had to create a model for the sea routes so that we could figure out how what the best path was based on wind conditions, wind frequency, and strength. The roads were developed from the data set put together by the Barrington Atlas, and sites were selected by the PI, Walter Scheidel. You can go to orbis.stanford.edu. There's 50 pages of documentation, including geospatial technology and the historical basis for the selection of the sites and all of that. And the end result is a website, orbis.stanford.edu. And on that website, there are multiple points of interaction and points of view of the model. So first off, we've got a route finder. So if I want to know how to get from Rome to London, which was called Londinium, then I can calculate the fastest route from Rome to Londinium. It'll tell me the fastest route from Rome to Londinium took 42.1 days. This runs on a post-GIS, post-PG routing backend, so it's a spatial database, but it's also a graph database simultaneously. This not only shows the fastest route, it shows the cheapest route. So if your priority is expense rather than time, then it'll show you a different route. And it's also seasonal, so we take into account changing sea conditions and changing wind conditions on the sea, as well as conditions in high altitude regions. That mean if you want to find the cheapest route from Rome to London in May, it's a distinctly different route than it is during January, because you can actually sail along the Atlantic coast. It's all sorts of cool stuff that comes out of this. One of the cool things that comes out of it is that you can take a look, a sort of global view of the world, of the Roman world. We use what's known as a dynamic distance cartogram to distort the geography to reflect cost, and that cost again can be duration. So this is the Roman Empire from Rome with geography distorted based on cost. If it was distorted based on time, it has a different shape. This is all based off of running a bunch of least cost paths from the center point actually toward the center point from all the other points on the network. And of course that shape is different depending on what center you decide in the empire. There's a third view, what I like to call a situated view of a transportation network. That's Orbis Via. And so what this allows me to do, people don't take my situated view of a transportation network seriously because I was inspired by Oregon Trail. But what this allows you to do, this is very similar, I think, to what Nina was talking about. It allows you to present a view of the network from a single site in the network, and you can select one of your vehicle types and sort of traverse the network by selecting sites and selecting which mode you want to take. So it would take 0.89 days to travel from Vienna to Lugdunum, using private travel as your metric on land. It would take 3 days to travel upstream. So you sail upstream, it takes 3 days, and it keeps track of all of this and records stats for your little journey through the Roman Empire. And it provides, these are actually, I mean, rather than just being gimmicky, these are really useful to have these different points of interaction into this model, and support the idea that this is not just sort of an exploratory tool, but rather a representation, an interactive representation of an argument. So this is an interactive scholarly work. This is not an actual representation of the Roman Empire. This is a representation of the shape of the Roman world based on the arguments of the PI, Walter Scheidel, and also sort of the arguments that are embedded in the digital processes we use to build it. There are other points of view and interaction. First of all, there's the website itself. You can go and navigate through the website. And there's also a PDF of all the text and static versions of all of these interactive objects and all of the images that are on the website, so you can download a PDF. It's in a classic journal style. And there's an API that we'll release as soon as we have enough server load to support it. Strangely enough, when we talk about having multiple audiences, Orbis got 275,000 visitors in the first month, which is really rather, it's not significant for like a cat video on YouTube, but it's really significant for a 50-page paper on the Roman world that has 5 pages of footnotes. So what I became interested in was how this fit into existing concepts of networks in relation to historical states. So there's something called central place theory, which tries to determine how sites are located in prehistorical time. It's based on maximization of the cost to ship goods from one group to another. The idea being that early villages are going to spring up in between different pre-modern groups, pre-modern settlements. And those sites in between are going to grow in economic strength and become early cities. And then the sites in between those two cities are going to become second-order sites. I'm interchanging sites and cities because it's kind of one of the issues with central place theory was it was developed for explaining pre-modern settlement practices. It's been adapted to historical settlement practices, but it runs into some issues. First of all, it's based on distance. It's not based on cost. And if you look at Orbis, what you'll notice is that distance is actually the worst way you could measure efficiency of this network. So cost, and cost could mean time, or cost could mean the actual expense to ship goods, is much more complicated, much more difficult to work with. So it makes sense, you know, central place theory was put together in 1936 before they had pencils and paper, or I mean, a long time ago before anything was invented. In seriousness, I mean, it's more sophisticated than that, especially what came later. But what I'm particularly interested in is world systems theory. And one flavor of world systems theory posits that there are 4 networks. So there's a bulk goods network for shipping low value, high density goods. There's a political military network which resembles your sort of classical state system. There's a prestige goods network for very lightweight, very valuable goods. And then there's an information network. And it's these 4 networks in interplay that determine what a state looks like. You guys have seen a lot of network visualizations. I bet you've never seen a network visualization like that, right? So again, you know, world systems theory was invented in another time before pencils, I'm sure. What I was attempting to do, or what I'll show you coming up, is an attempt to look at the Orbis network and try to identify these 4 different types of networks as they would appear within the structure that we're working with when we develop this network. So political, military, information, and economic networks are easy to speak of in narrative, but if you try to apply them to a network model, you have to sort of define what you're talking about when you speak of a piece of information. So the way that Orbis operates is it is working with vehicles, or more specifically, a vehicle matrix, because there's different modes of travel. So you could have a different set of restrictions on your river travel versus your land travel. And so what I tried to do was represent political networks with a certain type of vehicle matrix, military networks with another, economic networks with a third, and information networks with a fourth. Fundamentally, this breaks down to political networks are 36 kilometers on land, 36 kilometers per day on land, and variable rates on the river, but typically 65 kilometers downstream, 25 kilometers upstream. Military is faster on the river, faster on land. Economic is different entirely because, of course, we're not talking about time, we're talking about price. And what you see here is I've left out the sea because, of course, the sea is very fast. It's 80 kilometers a day typically. And so is a better option, it's a better mode in almost every case. And in the economic case, transportation of goods on the sea is just far and away significantly more effective than transportation on land. And still more effective, though not to the same degree as on river. What's really interesting, though, is if you sort of posit an information network and you imagine the maximum speed that information could possibly travel in the Roman Empire, that's about 250 kilometers a day. It's the amount of, it's the speed of a 24-hour horse relay. And this is a proxy for information. And one of the issues that I deal with at the end is that it's a bad proxy. And there's probably better with all of these, but it's a place to start. So if we take this network, and this is what it looks like in Gephi. If we take this network and we weight and we assign edge weight based on that cost, based on the inverse of that cost, then we can run PageRank and we can run weighted modularity, so weighted PageRank and weighted modularity, and identify different communities for each of these types of network, as well as different centers for each of these types of networks. So if we take that political network and we break it down, and the modularity on this is about 75%, or 0.75. I've never known actually how to express that. But so very strong modularity. You see these distinct large modules, and you also see sort of these highly central nodes according to that weighted PageRank. Down in the southeast here, if you squint, you can see the Nile. This is the Mediterranean. I've turned off the edges in between these modules to make them a little more distinct. And I think what's important, rather than focusing on this one network, is to notice that it's a different set of modules and a different set of rankings if we look at the military network. And further, it's a distinctly different set if we look at the economic network. So these modules in certain places overlap and in other places shatter into other modules, or they're held in common by two separate modules, depending on what you're looking at. You'll notice here the strength of these edges is the thickness of the edges represents the weight of the connection. So you see this incredibly strong connectivity that's provided by the Mediterranean and the Adriatic and the Atlantic coast. So there are 4 networks, and again with 2 states, because of course the entire left side of this network, the entire left side of the sea routes of this network is turned off in the winter. So we can take a look. And finally, information. This is what's really interesting. In every other case, sea travel is the preferred method to get from one place to another, whether you're shipping goods or whether it's private travel. Information, however, finds that 80 kilometer per day limit to actually be a disturbance to the formation of communities. And that's the only place where it happens. It's the only place where land travel is actually, or these land routes, I shouldn't say land travel, but these land routes are the stronger connections between points. So you end up with a very different set of communities if you're looking at this sort of, this proxy for information. And so we can compare the two of them and think about whether or not part of the reason for the extent of Justinian's reign when he reunites the empire has something to do with this political network, which if you leave out the 2 modules on the left-hand side, then that's Rome under Justinian. There are certain ways that these modules in the way that they overlap that could relate to the Tetrarchy. There are issues here. My background is in environmental history of China. So I'm working with Walter Scheidel on this to determine whether or not this has historical significance or whether this has to be further refined. But I think that this idea of these 4 networks with different definitions of communities and different definitions of centrality depending on the the priority of the travel along the networks is what's particularly interesting here. And what we can do is we can take this then and sort of lay it out in parallel coordinates. So this giant spider web is, we've got 4 module classes that all of these sites can be part of. We have 4 centrality rankings in summer. We have 4 module classes in summer. We have 4 centrality rankings in winter. We have 4 module classes in winter. And what it allows you to do is take a look and see what modules, so for instance, what economic modules are part of module number 4 in the political layout, in the political community detection. And if we say, well, what sites are in both module 4 in the political sense and then module 4 in the economic sense, and which of those are in module 5 in the military sense, you get some kind of, you get a set of sites that are actually stable through all of these modules that might reveal sort of core structures within the network that would be interesting to explore sort of back in the historical perspective. I'm going to work on this so it's integrated with a geographic layout and you can actually see a list of the sites and everything so people can play around with it, since obviously this is all done in D3, everything, all of the interactive elements except for the route finder, which is open layers. And so hopefully I'll put this up in a couple of weeks and people can play with it and point out things that are wrong with it. There are issues which I'll just leave up because we're running out of time. There are obviously issues. I'm sure that there are more. So I'll leave it open to questions for other issues.
So I'd like to give you one little background. Actually, in 1901, a map came out called the former Urbis Rome, drawn by one guy, Rodolfo Lanciani, which is still the city map of the city of Rome. And of course, it's wrong in every detail. And it's the same kind of critique which anybody who is a professional in the topography of Roman Empire would actually say, right? So where I come from, for example, there's a Roman road which is not on the map. And of course, I thought, oh my God, the whole thing is wrong. But Lanciani's map is still the only city map where all the documents are taken into account. And this is basically the best thing we have, and it's really, really good. And so basically that's also an explanation for the success, right? That's what people actually waited for 50 years, right? In a sense. So we have actually space for one question. Dino Tini is already outside, and so yeah, please go ahead.
Are there any historical hypotheses that you've tested in terms of, you know, a battle being lost because something didn't arrive in time, or anything like that you're probing with this?
Oh, yeah. There are not any historical hypotheses that I've tested because I'm not a historian of Rome. There are apparently several things that this has revealed that, like the genes, I'm not allowed to talk about because they're in progress. But yeah, there do seem to be serious explanatory capacity to the network model, despite the fact that, as Max pointed out, there are issues with it, of course. I mean, any abstraction. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.